Good evening and welcome to this week's edition of the Pete Mezzetti Show. My guest this evening is Eric Hammerling from the Connecticut Forest and Park Association. Eric, welcome. How are you?
Thank you. Great to see you.
Good to see you. Good to see you as well. And Eric, tell us maybe a little bit about yourself and what exactly is the Connecticut Forest and Park Association?
Well, the Connecticut Forest and Park Association is actually the oldest conservation organization in Connecticut. We were established in 1895 at a time before there were state parks or state forests, before there were blue-blazed hiking trails, and before there was a Yale School of Forestry even. And that was a different time. We had much less forested areas at the time, and there was a real interest in learning about the outdoors, learning about the forest, making sure people understood that those are valuable things. And so my predecessors at CFPA over 120 years ago said, let's try to do something about that. The first thing that CFPA started doing was to try to get people excited about this new concept of a state park or a state forest. And in 1903, we had the first state forest established in Portland State Forest, Portland, Connecticut. And since that time, we've been pursuing establishing state parks and forests throughout the state. And in the 1920s, we started this really radical thing called the blue-blazed hiking trail system, which was all about, if people are going to get outdoors, we need to get them out on trails. And all 825 miles of the blue-blazed hiking trails are maintained by volunteers who work with our staff to make sure we've got a great system that everyone can use for free. So we're all about getting people outdoors, and we also try to spend some time working on policy issues to make sure that there's funding for parks and trails, and we're really taking good care of our natural resources here in the state. So I'm very proud to be associated with CFPA.
Now, before you were to CFPA, what did you do?
So before then, I was the executive director at the Farmington River Watershed Association, which is a group focused on the Farmington River and all its tributaries to try to make sure that the river is protected. So that means working with towns, making sure that as areas develop, they're thinking about ways to do it in an environmentally friendly way. And that was a really exciting thing to do for a while, but I've now been with CFPA for 10 years. So yeah, it's a real pleasure.
Very nice. And I'm sure during the summer that you guys at CFPA are very busy with all the parks and everything going on.
Absolutely. Well, this year is a real interesting test because there's a new program happening statewide called the Passport to the Parks. And this is a way that everyone can get into state parks for free. You may be used to going in the past to a place like Hammonasset on the weekend. One family, one car load would pay $13 to get into a state park. Now it's free. How are we able to do that? Well, this program basically says, everyone, when you register your vehicle, you pay an additional $10 every other year, and that $10 that you pay every other year goes to fund park operations and maintenance, so everyone can enjoy them for free. I think it's a really wonderful thing, and we hope that some people who maybe before didn't go to state parks or forests because they're concerned about the cost will go now and really enjoy them just like everyone else.
Very cool idea. I like that idea.
Yeah, well, we're hoping that it will really get many more people out and exposed to the outdoors. That's really very much our mission. Mm-hmm. And apparently, when they've done the attendance figures every year for the state parks, over 9 million people a year go to parks in Connecticut. So it really is one of those amazing resources. And the towns that have parks in them really can feel the difference when people come and are spending money, and local businesses are getting out there and enjoying the outdoors. It really is, it's an economic engine. It's also a way that people are able to connect to the outdoors. And we, of course, hope they'll also be good stewards of the outdoors because they have more familiarity with them.
How many, roughly, forests and parks how are there in the state of Connecticut?
So we have about 110 state parks and 34 state forests. There are also places like wildlife management areas. The lands that are managed by the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection that include all of those, it's about 250,000 acres of land. So it's a good amount of land. It's probably considerably less than 10% of our state's land. And there's actually a goal for the state to protect 21% of its land as open space. The state is supposed to protect of that 21%, 10%, and then groups like land trusts and water companies protect that 11%. So together, 21% of the state should be open space. We think that that's a really great idea because open space is where people go to get away from it all. And with all the hectic things that happen in all of our daily lives, it's really important to have places like that to escape, have fun, and play.
Now, you and I were talking before we taped tonight about forests and parks. In particular, what happened up at Sleeping Giant because of the tornado?
Yeah, well, it's amazing. I have never seen that kind of devastation before in Connecticut. It's shocking because you don't think about tornadoes in the Northeast. That's other parts of the country that have to worry about those kinds of things, but we were hit really hard. And the way that it was described to me that I thought was pretty powerful is just to imagine about a 10-foot by 10-foot square. Let's say and imagine a lawn that's 10 feet by 10 feet. And now imagine all of those blades of grass are trees. Now take a board, a piece of plywood that's 3 feet by 3 feet, and just slam it down in one section of that 10 by 10 forest, grass forest. And that's the kind of devastation that they found. Healthy trees were just ripped apart. Basically what they had to do, and this will be happening over the next several months, is unfortunately a lot of those trees aren't able to be turned into anything like lumber that could be used or anything. They have to just turn it into wood chips and take it off site, and some of it they leave in the woods. But it's going to take a long time to recover from that. And one of our trails, the Quinnipiac Trail, goes through Sleeping Giant State Park. So we have some amazing volunteers who are trying to clear areas over time. They're out there in the woods with their chainsaws and trying to open up trails again. It's a big effort, and that hit us really hard this year.
How's the effort coming so far?
Well, it's really just beginning. There were several weeks where the state, the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, wouldn't let anyone go out there because it was just not safe.
Right.
Now they're starting to have some volunteers go into some confined areas to do some work. But it's going to probably take many months. I would guess, through November, maybe even the end of the year before it's open again and people can enjoy it as trails and for passive recreation.
That's amazing.
It really is. It was just orders of magnitude beyond things that we had seen before, and no one ever plans for something like that, which is tough. And at the same time, they have some additional resources to maintain the parks because of the passport to the parks, and they're encouraging people to get out. Then sometimes you get hit with something like that. They're trying to get funding from FEMA to try to allow for the clearing of the devastation out there, but we don't know if they'll be able to really recover well in those areas for quite some time.
It's probably going to be a couple month, if not a couple of year project to get
think you're right.
everything up and running.
Absolutely, yeah. It's going to take a long time, but I think everyone appreciates that those areas are special, and people really rely on them. It's incredible. You've probably heard interviews with people who, hey, that's where I always went for my walk, my exploration of the woods. That's where I went to see birds, and Even every now and then I'd see bears. Those are the kinds of things that people expect when they go to the woods, not to see that kind of devastation. So we're just hoping it's as soon as possible that it can get fixed up.
And Sleeping Giant's a beautiful place if you've never been.
It is, and it really has some amazing views. It's one of the better used parks. There are, maybe 500,000 people a year will go to a place like Sleeping Giant, and you can access it in a bunch of different ways. It's really it's a special place.
And what's really cool about all the local parks is the upkeep of the local parks are pretty well maintained throughout the year?
Well, generally speaking, they are, okay. but it's been interesting over the last decade to see the way that the state park system has been cut again and again and again. That's part of the reason why we felt it was necessary to have a program like the Passport to the Parks to actually have a dedicated source of funding.
Yeah.
It used to be that the parks were 100% reliant on the general fund for support. And as you know, in tough budget times, what's the first thing that gets cut? The general fund.
Yes.
When the general fund gets cut, the parks were really taking a disproportionate cut every year. And in fact, over the last 2 years, there were 4 state campgrounds that were closed. Okay. There were seasonal workers who are so responsible for maintaining parks during the spring to fall season were at levels about half of what they were in the past. But thanks to the Passport to the Parks, they're actually able to restore them to where they were a few years ago before some of those cuts. So we think that's the positive side of the story, but it's been a tough bunch of years for the parks.
Yeah, it sounds like it's been a tough bunch of years for the park. And would you mind sticking around for another segment?
Absolutely.
We'll be right back.
Thanks.
Thanks.
I'm Howard Schwartz from the Better Business Bureau serving Connecticut with a consumer moment. Consumers have more power in their hands than ever before. We can go into a store to find an item and then jump on the computer and click until we find the best price. Just remember, aside from the majority of legitimate businesses, there are criminal operations that put up sophisticated-looking websites that are designed to steal your credit card or other financial information. Even legitimate bottom-basement prices can sometimes be deceiving if you compare the costs of shipping and handling. Do your homework, take your time, and try to stick with well-known websites. Before you pay, make sure that the website address begins with HTTPS. S stands for secure, and you'll see a padlock icon next to it. That means the website is taking the steps necessary to protect your information. This consumer moment is brought to you by BBB Serving Connecticut, where you can start with trust.
And welcome back to this week's edition of the Pete Mezzetti Show, sitting here with Eric Hammerling from the Connecticut Parks and Forests Association. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we were talking a little bit about in the first segment what's going on with the Connecticut Forest and Park Association and the forests, the parks, and everything else. Mm-hmm. Where do you want to open this segment?
Well, I would love for us to talk a little bit about public lands.
Yeah, let's go for it.
There's something that people are really surprised to hear when I talk to different folks. First of all, they don't know that if something is a state park or forest, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's protected. Which is pretty surprising. Right. Most people see a state park and they say, oh, well, this is going to be like this forever. But the state's General Assembly actually has the ability to sell, swap, or give away public land. And they do it every year. They have a process called the conveyance bill, which they use to essentially sell, swap, or give away public lands. The way that it typically works is they'll show us the things that are in the bill. There will be a public hearing, but then the dangerous part happens, and that is we wait until the very end of the legislative session, and the last day or two of session, here comes an amendment to add new public lands to that bill and pass it. There's no opportunity for public input at that point. It's really too late to do anything about it. And every year there are strange things that are included in that bill. This year, something that happened that got a little bit of media coverage in the Hartford Courant and other outlets was the Hartford Regional Market, which is a place right where Route 91 and 84 come together. It's a really vibrant place where restaurants get their fresh foods, and there's
the farmers market.
The farmers market.
Yes.
So that was held by the state's Department of Agriculture, which makes sense.
Right.
But at the very last few hours of the session, that was given to the Capital Region Development Authority. And it's really fuzzy on what the Capital Region Development Authority will be doing with that land. Now, there was a little bit of legislative language put in there that referred to the food piece of the market.
Okay.
But that's certainly not the way that things should be done. There was a really great quote in the article from the Connecticut Farm Bureau, which when they heard about it, they were really devastated. They said, if it was such a great idea that it should be done through legislation, why do they do it in the dark of night? And that's really something that we think is so important, is when you're thinking about public land, and that could be land owned like state parks and forests, and but it's also land held by the Department of Agriculture and other state agencies. That's public land. That means we all own a share of it. And we really should insist that before it's given away, we ensure there's public input. So that's one of the things that happened this year. And there's an opportunity in November to go to the ballot. On the November 6th ballot, there will be something we can vote for that will help fix that problem. And that's something that we've been spending a lot of time on.
Well, we'll talk about it now, but like I said to you before, we'll have you back on and talk about it more towards November. But what is it?
Sure. Well, let's have at it. So if the biggest concern that we have as the conservation community, as members of the public, is that public lands are given away without a public hearing, how do you ensure that there is one? Well, you have to actually amend the state constitution to do that, and that's why it's on the public ballot. If people vote yes for what's on the ballot in November, it would do two things. It would, number one, require that there's always a public hearing before public lands are sold, swapped, or given away. We think that's critical. And that would basically stop that end of session mischief of giving away public lands.
Okay.
It also would require that for the most valuable conservation lands, like parks and forests and agricultural lands, those would have to get a 2/3 vote from the legislature rather than a simple majority. So it would really raise the bar on protecting those special lands, and we think that's absolutely critical, and obviously hope it will pass.
Now that's going to be on the ballot for all 169 towns?
It's on the ballot in all 169 towns. The Secretary of State is working on the ballot stuff probably as we sit here.
Probably.
And we're hoping that that's something that there will be many more yeses than nos, because when people hear about this, first of all, they're a little bit surprised the General Assembly could do this in the first place. Right. But also, I think feel typically very strongly that the public should have a voice in public lands, and that's all we're trying to ensure.
Now, as far as passage of the vote, do you need a certain number of votes to make sure it passes?
We only need more yeses than nos.
Okay. All right. Okay.
So because some people will go to the ballot box and they'll see a question there and they'll say, I don't know what this is, and leave it blank. That doesn't hurt us or help us.
Yeah.
We really just need more yeses than nos.
Exactly. Well, I didn't know that existed.
Well, I'm glad we got to talk about it.
I didn't know.
Yeah.
What else do we want to tell everybody about the...
Well, I want to tell people that there's something really special about Connecticut that many people don't fully appreciate, and that is we're a special state when it comes to trails.
Yes.
Every year, the first weekend in June, there's a big celebration that we all take part in, and it's called Connecticut Trails Day. This year, there were over 250 events happening all around the state, held by local land trusts and watershed groups, and there were walks, there were paddles, there were dog walks, there were all sorts of fun outdoor events. And these are, celebrating those trails that we have really throughout the state. Even though we're a small state, we have more Trails Day activities happening here than any other state in the nation, and I think we should be really proud of that.
Cool. Now, how'd the idea of Trails Day come up?
Well, the American Hiking Society in, I think, 1994 said this would be a cool thing to try nationally. One weekend a year when people would really try to focus on getting people outdoors. And of course, just like Earth Day is every day for us, Trails Day is every day for us too. But we have, since the very beginning, that first year in 1994, CFPA took on the challenge of, for Connecticut, trying to coordinate different activities happening all around. And we're very fortunate that we have so many land trusts and park rec departments and partners like the Appalachian Mountain Club and lots of other groups that are willing to lead hikes and expose people to different parts of the outdoors. I go every year to at least 4 events over the weekend, and I would really encourage people to look forward to that next year.
And is it always
that first weekend in June?
First weekend in June?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Very nice. And obviously, there's activities all over the state, so you're going to want to check out.
That's right. Well, we've only got 169 towns, right?
Right.
And we had 250 plus events. Not to say there was an event in every single town.
Yeah.
Some had multiple ones, but there's always going to be something within, probably 10 minutes of where you are.
Going on.
And we encourage people to get out and explore.
That is really cool. That's really cool. And obviously, you as executive director, you guys actually obviously probably have a board of directors who, do you have a good-sized staff?
Yeah, we have a staff of 11,
Okay.
8 full-time, 3 part-time. We've got a wonderful board who's so dedicated as volunteers.
Cool.
And we've got amazing volunteers for the organization. Last year put over 27,000 hours into taking care of trails and getting people outdoors. So we're very, very fortunate.
Very cool.
And of course, we always encourage people to join the organization, get involved, volunteer. So many things to do. Got a terrific website with a lot of information.
Let's talk about the website. What type of information do we have up on the site?
So we have an events calendar that talks about all the things happening in the next month. We also have a really cool interactive trails map, so you can go see where all of the Blue Blaze hiking trails are throughout the state, find out places to park, find out actually driving directions to get to each of the trailheads. We'll also post notices, like at a place like Sleeping Giant, do not go here, this is closed.
Yes.
But it's a great way to find out about different places to go and explore.
Now, speaking of Sleeping Giant, I'm assuming all of Sleeping Giant is closed, or are there sections that are... Yeah, it depends.
Yeah, the major entrances to Sleeping Giant had a lot of damage, so they've just decided to err on the side of safety and close the whole thing. So, and I think they were concerned that if they opened just one part, people might go into a safe place, but then very quickly get into a place that was dangerous.
Yeah, and that would not be.
Now, of course, we never want to see a state park closed for anything other than something like a natural disaster.
Right.
We want people to be safe and really enjoy those places.
Exactly. And we've got a little bit more time left, so while we do, let's talk about, I know in this local area, you and I were talking before about Rocky Neck being one of the local state parks in the local area, and it's one of the smaller of the two, and they cover this footprint of an area.
Yeah, well, it's a really special place, and let me give you a quick CFPA story about it. This was kind of neat. At the very beginning of, Rocky Neck was not always a state park. Prior to that, it was a place that had a fish cannery. It was known as a place that was really smelly, a place that was right next to the railroad tracks, which it still is today, and really not a very favorable place for people to go. But people with a lot of vision said, this is right on Long Island Sound, let's see if we can protect it. And 9 of my board members back in the day stepped up and acquired Rocky Neck and then sold it to the state of Connecticut for no gain in price. It was a wonderful way to protect what today is one of our most special beaches.
Exactly. And I'm sure during the summer, especially during the warm weather, they have to be booming with business.
Absolutely. They get about 1 million people a year that go to Rocky Neck, and as I mentioned to you before, they have some really cool history there, including their main building, which inside, as you're walking through, you'll see all these interesting looking columns, and what those columns are all trees from all of the state parks that were in existence when that building was built. So you can actually go around and identify which tree from which park is in that really cool building. It's a neat way to learn about new things and explore a special place.
Very cool. Well, you and I talked about it before, but I didn't know it prior to that. That seems really neat.
Oh yeah, well, and I would say if people haven't been to Rocky Neck, that's definitely a place well worth checking out. You're so fortunate in your area here.
Right.
There are some amazing parks, and people get to enjoy the outdoors all the time.
Totally. One more time before we say goodnight, website for...
So if you go to ctwoodlands.org, that's the website for the Connecticut Forest and Park Association.
And you can find all sorts of information regarding what you guys are up to and all that other pertinent information on the site.
Yeah, including ways to be in touch and to visit us. So we encourage people to swing by all the time.
Eric, thanks for coming down. We'll see you soon.
Pleasure, Pete. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot. On behalf of Eric Hammerling, I'm Pete Mezzetti. Thanks, good night, and we'll see you next time.